Maybe we can wait for 4 minutes. Will it be okay? Hi Janice, Mbak Fitri.
Okay.
Do you mind? Do you mind if we wait for about 3 minutes?
Janice is here and
Yeah.
Mbak Fitri ya.
Yeah, Mbak Fitri.
Hi Janice.
Sorry. Yeah, no problem. We can wait for 4 or 5 minutes.
It is 27 now.
Okay, I think we can start the road, yeah.
Yeah, it's good to start.
Okay.
It's two,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, good day, ladies and gentlemen, presenters and students. Thank you for joining our second day workshop. I would like to remind you that those who haven't submitted the short video, please send it to the committee. The topic for yesterday's discussion is the global market demand. Today, on the second day, we are going to discuss about environmental awareness. Yeah, environmental awareness, or all about environment. Yeah, the contribution of oil palm to the environment. Today, we have two speakers. The first speaker would be Assistant Professor Janice Serhuali from ASEAN School of the Environment, Nanyang Technology University, Singapore. Okay. Educational background from ETH Zurich. Yeah. And ENV6. Yeah, this is the accreditation that I don't really familiar with, but I think Professor Janice can explain it to us. Professional experiences from 2006. She is the assistant professor at ASEAN School of Environment and the PI of Corporate Human and Natural System Lab, PI at Earth Observatory Singapore, Nanyang, NTU Singapore, 2014 and 2016, postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology and Science, Technology Environmental Policy Program at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public International Affairs, Princeton University, USA, 2013-2014, postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Environmental System Science, ETH, yeah, in Switzerland. Okay. And 2020 until 2025, yeah. Okay. 2025 intra create grant, okay, additional 20% of ERC using black soldier flies in the food waste management and sustainable food production in urban system. And then she's also in FCL Global, Agropolitan Terraces of Monsoon Area, and then NTU Imperial Seed Grant, and Earth Observatory Singapore, Ministry of Education Singapore, Tier 1 grant. Okay, she has some research grants and fellowship here. Research collaboration with the Ministry of Education Singapore, yeah, the Tier grant with the Assistant Professor Eleanor Slate, and also in NASA, yeah, NASA Land Cover and Land Use Coverage Change Program with Professor Mark Cochrane, person in charge for land use transition in Indonesia peatlands. She has some awards and professional recognition. First, as an associate editor in Biological Conservation Journal, guest editor in Frontiers in Forest and Global Change Special Issue on improving environmental sustainability in oil palm, as the editorial board to biological conservation, contributed to the IUCN Oil Palm Task Force Situation Analysis on oil palm and biodiversity, reviewed manuscript from the following journals: Natural Climate Change, PNES, Biological Conservation, Conservation Letters, Land Use Policy, Biotropica, Environment, Development and Sustainability, Remote Sensing, International Journal of Applied Earth Observation, Applied Geography, AMBIO, Agricultural System, Ecology and Society, Global Environment Change, Restoration Ecology, and +1. Okay, so she works as an editor or honorary editor in some journals. She has published some articles, like the title Environmental Research Letters, the title Special Patterns and Drivers of Smallholder Oil Palm Expansion within Pit Swamp Forest of Riau, Indonesia. She also wrote an article in Nature Food, the title Oil Palm Cultivation in India Can Be Expanded While Sparing Biodiversity in India, and her paper with other authors in Natural Hazard and Earth System Sciences, with the title Interacting Efforts of Land Use Change, Natural Hazard, and Climate Change on Rice Agriculture in Vietnam. Another paper published in Journal of Applied Ecology with the title Degradation of Southeast Asia Tropical Peatlands and Integrated Strategies for the Better Management and Restoration. Okay, I think our second speaker will be Ibu Fitri Hasibuan from Yayasan Konservasi Indonesia. Ya, Ibu Fitri has a first degree in agriculture and master in environmental management. Ibu Fitri spent a few years of her career working in NGOs on post-disaster recovery and community development projects across Indonesia. Ibu Fitri joined Conservation International Indonesia in 2013, managing Sustainable Agriculture and Sustainable Landscape Partnership, SLP, in North Sumatera, and conservation agreement projects in Asia Pacific region. She is now the Senior Program Director of Yayasan Konservasi Indonesia. Okay, there are two speakers for today. Without further ado, let's join me to have the pretest. The pretest would be sent to you using the Mentimeter. Admin, can you say the pretest? Grab your devices, go to menti.com, and please use the code 44286239. Okay. Get your devices, go to menti.com, use the code 44286239. And please answer the questions. What do you know about deforestation? The first question is, what do you know about deforestation? Okay, we have one responses. Environmental, forest, and land. We have one response already. You can also click the link that is set by Ibu Ria Barus in the chat box. Okay, you can click the link to the menti.com and use the code 44286239. So far, we have responses here. So when you heard the word deforestation, what these words comes to your mind? Cut off the forest, environmental impact, forest cut off. Okay, forest management. So dealing with deforestation, the first word comes to our mind is the forest itself. And then the second words may come with environment, management, chopping down trees, yeah. Free forest, fire forest, okay, fire forest. Okay, habitat lost, okay. When we heard the word deforestation, few words will come to our mind. The biggest word is the forest first, okay, and then come the environmental impact, less trees, not good for future, okay, habitat fragmentation, the action of clearing, land use change, okay, clearing of the forest. We have 14 responses so far from 30 participants. I want the participant to respond more to this question. What do you know about deforestation? You go to menti.com, use the code 44286239. All right, 16 responses so far. Okay, 18 responses out of 30 participants. Okay, so we are expecting more than 20. What comes to your mind? Or what do you know about deforestation, habitat fragmentation, chopping down trees, our concern right now, carbon emissions? We have no bad impact for the forest. Land use change, okay? I think these words will spin in our head when we heard the word deforestation. Next question, please. Ready for question number 2? With this still the same link, menti.com, the code 44286239. Do you think oil palm plantation is part of deforestation issue? Okay. If you respond to menti.com using the code 44286239, the same code, do you think that palm oil is a part of a deforestation issue? Definitely yes. Okay. Yes. One say no. Okay, it was. Okay. Yes, I guess. Yes, but not major part. Okay, mostly 100% yes. Okay, so oil palm plantation is part of deforestation issue. Okay, partially. Okay, yes, I guess, of course. So far, we have only one response saying no, but mostly says that oil palm plantation is a part of a deforestation issue. 15 responses. We still expect some responses from you. Okay, of course, I think so. Yes, I think so. Exactly, partially, mostly. Yes, but not major part. 100% yes. Palm oil as the reason. All right. Okay, so the first question, what do you know about deforestation? We think about the forest, the environmental impact, okay, cutting the trees and so on. But now, and you think that oil palm plantation is part of the deforestation issues, because mostly say yes for this. 18 responses. Now we go for, we have question number 3.
No, sir.
No,
Two questions.
only 2 questions. Okay, good. So far, presenters, now you know that the audience, what the audience thinks or from these 2 pre-test questions. I hope that you can address what they need to know more about the issues. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, participants, please join me to welcome our first speaker for today, Assistant Professor Janice Sherihwali from ASEAN School of Environment, NTU Singapore. Professor Janice, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sofian. May I know if I am using my computer to put on the slides or someone else will do it for me? I can do it also.
You can do either.
Okay, so I'll present from my Can you see my slide? Yes. I think now it's a full screen, right? Okay, so I'm assuming this is fine. And thank you so much for inviting me. I want to thank Dr. Diana Khalil for inviting me again for the second Palm Oil Sustainable Supply Chain and Sustainable Landscape Workshop, and also for Mr. Sofian for starting off the session with some very interesting questions. So my name is Janice Lee. I'm an assistant professor at the Asian School of Environment at Nanyang Technological University of Singapore. We are quite a small school. We started about 7 years ago. But our school is quite diverse in our disciplines, and one of the specializations looks into the interaction between society and also the environment. So today I'll talk a bit about the issue of sustainable landscapes in Southeast Asia. Specifically, I think our focus really is about palm oil, and also how it links back to the country of Singapore, which is really a very tiny country in the midst of Southeast Asia's region, but how we have an impact on this region, and also how the environmental issues in this region has an impact on us. Okay, so I'll begin my talk with a bit about the discipline that I am currently involved in. So as Mr. Sofian had mentioned, I graduated in environmental system science in ETH. So it's a very diverse, kind of like environmental studies where we both work on environmental and also social issues linking to the environment. So I think broadly these days it's called land system science, which was traditionally looking into monitoring and modeling land use and land cover change, very reliant on GIS and also remote sensing. But more recently has also become a lot more integrative. So trying to engage also people who are from economics and social science into the process of understanding land use and land cover change. Because when we talk about the issue of land, it encompasses both the natural biophysical conditions and also the human conditions. So we are looking into tracking land use change and also trying to understand the processes on the ground using field-based methods. And then at the end of the day, hopefully inform the use of models and the development of models for understanding land use and land cover change. So land use change is an important issue. It's a major driver in terms of contribution to greenhouse gas emissions and also a driver of biodiversity loss. It's also an important driver in the sense that it is a very targeted issue. So especially when we focus on the issue of tropical deforestation, there are very concrete evidence out there that discusses, how tropical forests are cleared because of agricultural commodities. And, some of you are not wrong in saying that, well, what do you mean by deforestation? When you answer the question, it's partially caused by oil palm, or it's not really caused by oil palm. I think we need to look into the time period that we're talking about and also the spatial extent that we're looking at, right? So if you're looking at tropical deforestation in the Amazon, right, well, it's partially or in a very small percentage driven by oil palm, but greatly led by cattle and soy. But if we're looking at the region of Southeast Asia, then, oil palm is definitely a big driver of deforestation in the last couple of decades. Some of you have also mentioned it was a possible driver. We do see trends of this declining, mainly because of the moratorium or the legislation that is implemented by companies, their own corporate legislations or sustainability policies that we try to implement. But it's again, it really depends on the context and where we're talking about, right? So it can be a current deforestation driver, or it could be a past deforestation driver. But we shouldn't forget about other agricultural commodities such as cocoa, plantation rubber, coffee. These are also important commodities. They are very lucrative, and they can also cause a lot of deforestation in this region. So as plantation wood fiber, which are your acacia and eucalyptus plantations. I won't go into this. I discussed a bit more about why Singapore is related to the issue of agricultural commodities and deforestation. But if you're interested, feel free to look up this article on Channel News Asia. So I guess this is the outline for the talk, briefly discussing the issues of forests, peatlands, and also their benefits, and then the effects of commodity-driven deforestation. Of course, our focus is on palm oil because this is the workshop that we're attending, and Singapore's role in trying to create a sustainable landscape within this region. So I guess the organizers do let me know if I am over time. Just remind me if I have 5 minutes left because I tend to go over time. So feel free to just give me a text message or interrupt me in the talk. Okay. So tropical forests in this region, it accounts for about 15% of global tropical forests, and we're also located in a very interesting, high diversity area, which we call a biodiversity hotspot. So we call it a hotspot because it's high in endemism, meaning that it's high in the type of species that can only be found in this region. But it's also rapidly, the forest is clearing very quickly. So the pace of deforestation is very high. So that's why we call this a biodiversity hotspot. And there are many biodiversity hotspots in this world, mainly focused in the tropics. Southeast Asia is one of them. There are many different forest types. So when we talk about forests, we can be talking about forests in the mountains, in the mangroves, in the lowlands, in freshwater swamps, in peat swamp forests. So they provide very important ecosystem services, for example, carbon sequestration, water regulation, and also a host of very unique biodiversity. Not just that, right? It also provides livelihoods for people. So collecting non-timber forest products such as rattan, depending on a healthy ecosystem in order to provide for fishes, for example, and also spiritual values and cultural values. But in many cases of Southeast Asia, we also face threats related to the forest. So the issue of logging, agricultural land clearing, fires, which can then, in turn affect the ecosystem services that are provided to people. If we focus on Indonesia, I think this is a paper that was published quite a while back in 2013. The general trend of the primary forest cover loss in Indonesia is increasing in terms of its loss over time. And you can see this loss is driven mostly in the two islands of Sumatra and also Kalimantan, which is represented in red and green. There are also other islands which show smaller scales of deforestation. But of course, it doesn't mean that it's out of the woods yet. And this is also quite old data in 2012, right? So we're about 10 years of behind in terms of data. And I'm sure if you look at the data from 2012 to 2022, you probably see also an increase in deforestation, especially in the region of Papua, where there's a lot of expansion that's going on in terms of plantations. If we look at the island of Borneo, so including Kalimantan, but also Sarawak, Sabah, and also Brunei, you see a more dramatic decrease in the forest landscape from 1950 to 2020. Right, so this is from the Deforestation Atlas published by David Cavill and C4. And you can see that, when the forest extent had actually reached the coast, it's now shrunk and then it's mostly focused in the hinterlands or in the mountains. Of all the different types of forests that we discussed, peat swamp forests are actually a very important carbon sink. I think if you have traveled to the many coastal areas in Sumatra, especially on the eastern side, you notice that the landscape is very different. It's very flat. The water is black. So this is a very unique kind of ecosystem where peat swamp forests are thriving. Unfortunately, also it's causing a lot of, or rather, it's also shrinking in terms of its size because of logging, draining, and also the expansion of both plantation and also smallholder agriculture. So why is peat important? So when we think about peatlands, the water table for peatlands normally are very high, very close to the surface. And this is basically rich organic soil that has been, what do you call it? That has been, let me see if I can, sorry. I wanted to use a pointer, but I'm not sure if I'm able to do that. So rich organic soil that has been formed over millennia, and for thousands of years, they have been decomposing in a very slow way, because of the waterlogged condition. So when the water is, very high up in the water table, it slows down the decomposition rate. So this is basically like a carbon sink. But once you start to create canals, once you start to clear the forest, you start to see a decline in the water table. And that means that, this peat that is above the water table is exposed. It results in peat oxidation, which is the release of carbon. And it's also very susceptible to fires. So then, when you light a fire, especially during the drought season, it's very difficult to put that fire out because the fire can also be burning below ground, below the surface of the ground. So it's once it's opened up, the kind of system is very hard to restore over time. However, there's a lot of programs and initiatives launched by the Indonesian government to actually try to do that. And as a result of these fires, you have these massive smoke plumes that come out from the peatlands, resulting in the issue of surface and also smoldering peat. So this is like fire that's burned above ground and also fire that's burning below ground. Lots of livelihood and also health effects. So people are breathing in the smoke, and this can cause a lot of health respiratory problems. And also you have crops that are being burnt by the fires, which is a loss of the economic livelihoods for people. And it becomes a regional episode, once every few years, especially during El Nino or the Indian Ocean Dipole event. So these are climatic events where drought is especially long in the islands of Sumatra and Kalimantan. And once the fires are lit, it's very hard to actually put them out. So this is a picture taken by NASA in 2015. And it shows you the smoke plumes that are coming out from the peatlands in South Sumatra, Central Kalimantan. And you can see how the wind transports this air pollution to other capitals like Singapore and also Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. All right, so we've talked a lot about forests, peatlands, also their benefits, and also how they've been threatened and also the effects. We specifically discuss on palm oil. And let me just recap with you about commodity-driven deforestation. So globally, there was a study that tried to identify what are the main drivers of deforestation, not just in tropics, but also in the temperate regions. So you see like other causes of deforestation, right? Like forestry in other parts of the world, wildfire, urbanization, shifting agriculture, especially in the continent of Africa. But you also have this great portion which is commodity deforestation, very much affected by the issues of cattle and soy, and also Indonesia and Malaysia, primarily because of palm oil. We'll focus on this region, and as I mentioned, the different commodities that are involved, but not forgetting other tropical commodities that are also very common in Indonesia and in this region, like cocoa, rubber, coffee, and plantation wood fiber. So what is it all produced for? Many of the products that we use in our day-to-day lives have its origins in the plantations. For example, paper coming from acacia plantations, our wooden furniture tables from logging, and also the processed food that we eat coming from palm oil. Right. So palm oil is not just used for lots of this yummy processed food that we like to snack on. They also use for a lot of cosmetics, and also primarily for cooking oil. So this is the primary reason. It's a cheap, accessible oil for people, and then increasingly also for biodiesel. So the market for using oils or food oils for vegetable oils for diesel or for forgot what's the other one, petrol. Yeah. So in this part of the world, this fresh fruit bunch, which is the fruit that's coming from the oil palm, is being processed, so being squeezed out, and then I think sent to the mill, and then through many hands passed down to the processor, and then to the retailer, and then finally to us, the consumer. And I think you probably hear a lot about this yesterday from the company's personnel that discuss about the origins or the supply chain for palm oil. IUCN, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, was quite concerned about the relationship between oil palm and also biodiversity. So it convened a task force in which I also participated, where we reviewed all the different studies that were related to biodiversity and oil palm. And then this came out in a paper in Nature Foods or Nature Plants, and discussed a lot about the most up-to-date impacts of oil palm on biodiversity and also the environment. So we started off looking at, okay, what are the current existing plantations that are out there across the world? And in the past, mapping out oil palm plantations would have been so difficult because you need to download so many images to do the remote sensing and also the classification of oil palm. But with recent technology and then the very rapid pace of development for computers, it's become a breeze, especially with this application called Google Earth Engine, such that people are able to map out oil palm across the world very quickly. So we see that oil palm is not just something that's concentrated in this region, but it's also found in Central and South America, Central and West Africa, and also Southeast Asia and the Pacific, right? Not just in Indonesia and Malaysia, but you also have places like Thailand that are very important producers for palm oil. And we are also seeing different types of actors, right? Not just the industrial oil palm plantations, which are your figures on your left, but also the smallholder oil palm plantations that are your figures on your right. Showing that there really is a range also of different players as producers operating in these different landscapes. And the kind of systems that are present in the, across the world are also very different. A smallholder in Southeast Asia is very different from a smallholder in Central and West Africa, and likewise very different in Central and South America, right? What we think about typical land holding in terms of its size, the composition of the household, the way that the market is being structured in that locality, it's all very different depending on which geographic region you're talking about. In fact, it's also very different within Indonesia. So how oil palm is grown in a place in Riau might be very different in Central Kalimantan, in Sulawesi, in Papua. So what is oil palm's role in deforestation? I think this is very much a question that a lot of people ask. And it's actually not a very easy question to answer based on the many studies that are being produced. The reason being, as I mentioned before, is the timeline of these studies that have been published, and also the spatial extent in which they look at. And it could be looking at two different metrics to try to quantify the role of oil palm in deforestation. So in figure A, you have all the studies that are being produced for these different countries, sometimes grouped into regions. But the way that they classify or quantify deforestation is deforestation from oil palm. So they look into the extent of deforestation and then quantify, okay, how much of it actually was a result of oil palm plantations. So they first produce those deforestation maps, but they also have to produce those maps of oil palm. And then they look into, the percentage contribution of deforestation that's coming from oil palm. Other kinds of studies, which you see in figure B here, actually quantify a different metric, which is the expansion of oil palm into forest. So first looking into where are the oil palm extents in the region, and then after that, how much of this oil palm expansion actually went into or encroached into forests in the past, right? So these are two different metrics, and so they have to be represented separately. And you can see that it's slightly different when we're looking at the metrics for the same country. So let's say for Malaysia and also for Indonesia, right? The median value actually ranges either below 25% or between 25 to 50%, right? For Malaysia, it's around close to 50%, which is quite consistent in both metrics. For Peru, actually the only metric that's been produced is oil palm expansion to forests. So that's a pretty high percentage of about 50 to 75%. All right. So I don't have the areas to give you, so I cannot quite tell you the magnitude. But for sure, the magnitude of the deforestation as a result of oil palm is higher in Malaysia and Indonesia compared to like Peru and other regions like South America and West Africa, simply because the extent of oil palm expansion is higher in these two regions historically. All right. So this was a review that was done from the task force and compiled by Kim Carlson, who was the one leading the pulling together of these studies. And if you're interested to know more, I'm happy to share the paper with you and you can read up more about the supplementary material. We talked about peatlands earlier. So what about oil palm and also peatlands? So if you look at this diagram, which is produced by Mitterlund et al., the gray areas represent peatlands which are found in Southeast Asia. And you can see the red regions overlapping with the gray regions, which are where oil palm is planted over peatlands, and also acacia plantations, right, which is the ones that are providing your pulp paper and your paper products. Okay, so you can see in Sarawak, there's actually a lot of peatland conversion to oil palm, the same as Riau and also Jambi and South Sumatra. But it's also been quite highly, or rather replaced by acacia plantations as well. So bearing in mind that, there are other drivers of peatland degradation and not just oil palm. So why is this an issue? As I mentioned, when you change the land system, you basically lead to a loss of biodiversity or change in biodiversity and ecosystem services. Sometimes it's not always a loss, but most of the time it is, right? So this is what we call, the trade-off in terms of ecosystem services. So when you have a natural ecosystem, your productivity is low, right? Because you don't produce crops in these areas. But you have other regulating services like infectious disease mediation, regional climate and air quality regulation, water flow regulation, which are very high in terms of their services to people. If you convert a natural ecosystem to a very intense monoculture, very intensively cropped area, for sure you increase, in terms of your crop production, but everything else shrinks, right? Because you no longer have the structure of the forest, the root system, the biodiversity to maintain those ecosystem services. So what's the outcome, or how do we actually move towards a more sustainable form of land use? It's trying to have both of a cropland with restored ecosystem services. So trying to not maximize, but to the best extent, have a high productivity. It might not be the highest that you can go, but retaining all other ecosystem services by maybe planting trees, having riparian buffers, using low organic fertilizers or non how do you call it, less chemical pesticides in order to preserve the biodiversity and also to have some forest structure in order to ensure climate, air regulation, and also water flow regulation. So these are sorry, I was just looking at the question. I'll answer that question later. So these are very experiments that are actually being conducted right now to try. There are many experiments that are trying to and a lot of research that's going into how can oil palm plantations be modified, how can they be improved in order to restore some form of ecosystem services within the landscape, and not just clear it to the ground and then just plant oil palm. But in what ways can we also plant trees in between? In what ways can we have a riparian buffer, have more vegetation that's friendly to insects, that also regulates the ecosystem services and not completely destroys it. So some examples of how biodiversity is impacted. This is one example of what are the impacts related to converting primary forests into oil palm plantations. You have species richness on your y-axis and abundance on your x-axis. So these are two rather basic ways of measuring biodiversity. You can see that the taxa, different types of taxa like beetles, moths, ants, small mammals, they tend to go in the direction of down and left, meaning that you have lower abundance and also lower species richness. So as I mentioned, it's not always that the change in landscape can actually reduce biodiversity. So for example, bees actually show a slight increase in species richness, but they decrease in terms of the abundance. And then dung beetles, they show a decrease in richness, but they actually increase in the abundance of the taxa. So these are studies that have been compiled by Foster et al. In this paper that shows, what are some of the multi-taxa responses related to rainforest to oil palm conversion. And likewise, you have many different effects also on ecosystem services, which I won't go into here. But this is a nice review that was done by Dislik et al. That synthesized all the studies that look into the net effect on ecosystem services. Okay, excuse me for that. So apart from the environmental issues, I think I also like to touch a bit about the social issues that are related to livelihood changes as a result of oil palm expansion. And the landscape all around, these areas are changing quite rapidly. And, it's a very different pathway of change depending on the existing conditions for the people who are living there. So John McCarthy, who's a, I think, rural sociologist, he did some very nice ethnographic work in Jambi, and he looked into this agrarian change that was happening in 2010, or maybe earlier than that. And he described the change as being highly uneven. It depends on how changing livelihood strategies, either that they are enabled or constrained by the surrounding economic, social, and also political relations. And these are very different between time and space. So instead of very simplified narratives of oil palm being good or bad, inclusion, exclusion, the outcomes actually very much determined by how smallholders engage with oil palm. And I'm sure people who are studying this issue, especially Dr. Diana and also Rian, who is working a lot on smallholders, can also agree that it very much depends on like the conditions under which the households are engaged in oil palm, how they are negotiating, with the agents or with the companies in order to improve their livelihoods using oil palm as a pathway. But one thing for sure is that, as I mentioned, the landscape is changing and it's changing very rapidly. So imagine, if you are a household that is living through this rapid deforestation in the context of Borneo, right? And the very rapid, land use change that's happening over 20, 30 years. The emergence of these crops like oil palm means that people have to adapt rapidly, no matter whether they like it or not. So sometimes it's not exactly an issue of choice. It's something that they do in order to survive and also to better their livelihoods in these areas. So there's very much a heterogeneous effect, and the studies out there show that depending on how it is engaged, like how people are engaged, it could result in better outcomes for people. So for example, in Jambi, they show that people who plant more oil palm are actually better compared to people who are planting rubber. But it also shows, oil palm can contribute to greater inequality. And it could also, in some cases, improve livelihood standards and also nutrition. In another study, it showed that oil palm improved the welfare for people, but only in villages that started off as being very commercial-based or very market-based, compared to villages that were very subsistence-based, and it showed that the welfare outcomes were actually negative from oil palm. So it shows how, the livelihood outcomes are very much depends on the time frame of the analysis, the local starting conditions, and also types of factors that are involved in the study. All right, so I've spoke a lot about social environmental issues. I will now talk a little bit about what we do in Singapore or what we can do in order to promote sustainable landscapes in Southeast Asia. And when we look at the palm oil supply chain, I'm sure this is something that you guys discuss a lot in your workshop. A lot of focus is on the producer side, right? But actually, Singapore is engaged not just in the producer side, but all across the supply chain, the processing side, the trading, also the consumption side. Indonesia as well, right? But Indonesia is very much focused on production, processing. Indonesia is also a very big consumer of palm oil. But of course, the major buyers are China, India, and also EU. But yeah, Singapore actually plays a rather important role, especially in the middle portion of the supply chain, where we don't really see, we don't really hear about. So, what can we actually do to try to improve the sustainability of the palm oil supply chain? So for one, we can also promote these kinds of certification standards, which are voluntary sustainability sourcing policies that encourage producers to follow a certain standard of producing oil palm that is environmentally friendly. So for example, having riparian buffers or having protection for workers in conducting their fertilizer management. And you have different types of certification systems on board, like the RSPO and also the ISPO. Singapore as a trader, processor, could probably engage the companies that are very big traders and processors to, really adopt more of these kinds of certification standards. What that I did was trying to also evaluate the certification effectiveness for both environmental and social outcomes. And we do show a range of positive values or positive outcomes related to certification, such as lower deforestation, greater primary forests, or lower incidence of land pollution, also higher infrastructure for private educational facilities. But it didn't always occur in the places that we studied. So in some of these outcomes, it was only significant for, say, Kalimantan or for Sumatra, right? So these are just some of the, we need to encourage more studies to try to understand a bit more also about certification systems and how they concretely help or do not help people on the ground when we're looking into sustainable palm oil production. So trying to increase the uptake of certified sustainable palm oil among retailers and also consumers would be one way to try to improve the sustainability of the supply chain. And NTU as a university actually did something very interesting. It was engaged with a local NGO called PM.Haze, and student volunteers worked together with the NGO to ask the vendors in the canteen what kind of cooking oil they use and whether they would be willing to switch to sustainable palm oil. So they showed that 81% of the vendors use palm oil, 91% had halal certification, but I think only 3% had RSPO labeling. So what are the reasons for choosing that? And what are the concerns of the vendors, which is cost, quality, and health? And what's the price difference, which is actually about $1 only. And I think the students also did a survey where they asked students how much more were they willing to pay for their plate of rice or noodles if it was RSPO certified palm oil. And I think the figure was about 30 to 50 cents more. So that's quite an interesting study that was being pursued by a local university in Singapore. Another thing that we should also try to encourage are big companies, in terms of encouraging them to report more about their sustainability practices. And the Singapore Exchange, which is a place where you can do trading for your company, is a very important stock market, which can have a lot of power in terms of regulating the big companies. So one of the regulations that they made recently is to promote mandatory reporting of sustainability practices. However, it's still not, not ideal, because while about 45% of the companies actually discuss climate change, 35% disclose their performance related to climate change, only 1.9% use a reporting framework that is adapted to climate change. And it's not standardized, the reporting. It's not based on a reporting framework that is already established, well used, that is able to allow investors to evaluate across the different companies, which one actually performs better than the other. So there's a lot that Singapore as a big financial hub can also do to try to encourage better reporting frameworks. For example, traceability, transparency within the supply chain of these big companies, because they are participating very much in the Singapore economy, and Singapore is very much the base for a lot of big traders for palm oil. Right, so financiers, traders, processors, consumer good companies, like your Unilever and Procter and Gamble, to try and encourage more sustainable financing and also sourcing policies for palm oil. And then lastly, I think about regulation, right? So in the legislation, we haven't really passed like a very strict legislation about only importing palm oil that is sustainable, for example. But there are penalties to companies if they were to implement unsustainable practices, especially the issue of burning, because it, as I mentioned in the first part of my talk, it comes back to affect us in Singapore through the transboundary haze pollution. So in 2015, I think, 2014, the act was passed related to this transboundary haze pollution that actually penalizes companies on the ground in Indonesia that are also based in Singapore, should they find, and when I say they, the National Environment Agency, which is the public agency for environment, should they find actually evidence of satellite imagery burning in the concessions of these big companies. So there's a whole list of like penalties that will be implemented. I think there were about 2 or 3 cases that went through some investigation, but I don't think actually any company was as yet penalized since the passing of this law, right? So enforcing laws like the Transboundary Haze Pollution Act, also ensuring that government-linked investments also support sustainable practices on the ground would be an important area to target in terms of production from the supply chain coming from the side of Singapore. So I have about 1 minute to wrap up. Right, I think I'll just quickly go through these. I won't cover this. In this case, I talk about also questioning the purpose of palm oil. So especially if palm oil is going to the production of junk food, then we need to also think carefully, what is palm oil used for? And then I think briefly just, how a lot of these issues that we are facing right now has its roots in the plantation system that is linked to colonialist expansion and extraction from the past. So, can we rethink our relationship with the land? Can we think about how we could probably redo this plantation system that is across not just in Southeast Asia, but tropical America and also Africa, that has been, been very much affected by the legacies of our colonial past. So many of the methods for modern plantation expansion parallel the colonial practices in the past. So, how can we break free also, not just as a physical system, but also an economic and also a social system? So can we go back to, the origins of oil palm, which is actually, a lot of agroforestry that happens in West Africa, which is also the origin of where oil palm comes from. and thinking about, palm oil agroforestry differently rather than, shunning it and saying that it's low yield and low profit, but maybe thinking about it as a more like a trade-off, for example, like with the productivity and also the ecosystem services that are provided. Okay, so I think with that, I end my presentation. Thanks very much for reminding me, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Janice. We are very interesting, and we also have a kind of example that our students here maybe can follow, replicate about the survey, about the perception, about what other people think about the sustainable palm oil, or for example, in cooking oil. So we already received a number of questions showing that this topic is very much interest among our students, but I think before those who want to ask about that later on, we are going to play it during the question and answer sessions, and everybody that already write it can directly ask to Janice or Ibu Fitri. But now maybe we are going to see a short video first about deforestation, an interesting one. Let's see it.
Our planet's forests are some of the most valuable resources we have. They provide us with clean air, a source of food, construction material, and much more. Even more importantly, forests are a major line of defense against climate change. A single tree can absorb as much as 48 pounds of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere each year, which makes them the most effective CO2 scrubbing machines we have. Despite this, forests are being systematically eliminated all across the world. A process we know as deforestation. Each year, 15 billion trees are lost to deforestation and forest degradation. That's 36 football fields worth of trees a minute, and accelerating. At this rate, the world's rainforests may be completely gone within 100 years. This makes deforestation responsible for around 13% of the world's carbon emissions, making it a major driver of climate change. Not only do we need trees to absorb our carbon, when they're removed, much of the carbon they had stored is released. Rapidly growing agriculture is responsible for the vast majority of deforestation. Global demand for food, especially meat, forces millions of acres of forest to be cleared for cattle, soybean plantations, and palm oil production. Timber and fuel wood extraction, as well as wildfires, drive the partial destruction of forests, known as degradation. All of this is driven by our relentless economic expansion and population growth, with both set to continue increasing dramatically. While harvesting timber is necessary for our economy, unrestrained deforestation can lead to the disruption of weather patterns and the collapse of entire ecosystems, threatening our safety and other resources we depend on. So what's the solution? Can we stop this seemingly unstoppable force? The short answer, yes, but it'll take some work. Research has shown that it is possible to decouple economic growth from deforestation by reconfiguring our supply chains and adopting sustainable land use policies. Thanks to the efforts of activists, policymakers, and businesses around the world, deforestation is actually slowing down in some regions. Finally, reforestation and afforestation efforts are growing worldwide. One Tree Planted works with partners all across the globe to restore damaged forests and plant new ones. You can become a part of these efforts by volunteering to plant trees in your area or supporting these initiatives abroad.
Thank you, Pak Haslin. So I think we are going to continue to the next speaker session. We already listen and see about the situation physically and the impact of deforestation that has already been presented by Ibu Janice. And now we are going to see what has been done to cope with that, to address that from the point of view of NGOs, a very senior one, Ibu Fitri. Please receive our welcome, and the screen is yours. Thank you, Bu Fitri.
Thank you, Ibu Diana. Ibu Diana, can someone, Ria, maybe to share the screen? If
Yes.
Of course, Mbak Fit.
Oh, okay, Mbak Ria. Yep. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Bu Diana. Good afternoon, everyone. Participant of the second online joint workshop on palm oil, sustainable supply chain, and sustainable landscape. First, I'd like to thank the organizer, the Consortium Studies on Smallholder Palm Oil, for organizing this event and inviting me to share our experiences to the audience. So as presented by Ibu Diana, my name is Fitria Sibuan. I'm working for Yayasan Konservasi Indonesia. It's an Indonesian-based foundation or NGO aims to support, improve the management of natural resources and to achieve the sustainable development goals in Indonesia. Today, I'll talk about our experiences in building sustainable landscape program in North Sumatra. And I'll talk a little bit more deeper, some examples from our project site in South Tapanuli district. Mbak Ria, the next. Yeah, so this is the agenda of the outline of this presentation. First, I'd like to introduce a bit about the Yayasan, where I'm working, and explain a little bit about the landscape. Talking about the North Sumatra and South Tapanuli, I will briefly explain about the landscape. And next, I'll talk about the landscape framework, so how we frame about sustainable landscape. So I'll talk about that and give some more example on that. And the last one will be the summary. What would be our takeaways from like almost 10 years working in this space, what are our takeaways or messages. Next, Mbak Lia. Yeah, and about Konservasi Indonesia. Konservasi Indonesia is the main delivery partner of Conservation International. So if you heard, I'm not sure if you heard, but it's Conservation International is an NGO. Conservation International has been working in Indonesia for more than 20 years or 30 years now. And the Konservasi Indonesia is a national institution that continue the Conservation International work as Conservation International closed its operation. So we believe, as an NGO, we believe that multi-stakeholder collaboration across sectors and jurisdiction is very critical for achieving sustainable development goals and other goals related, for example, the emission reduction goals, restoration goals, and so on. So we need partners. So we at Konservasi Indonesia, we want to design a nature-based solution to address climate change problem using sustainable landscape and seascape approach for a create lasting impact for people and nature. So our focus here, next one, Mbak Arya. So we focus on 3 areas. So stabilizing climate by protecting and restoring nature, sustaining fisheries and marine resources, by supporting government to protect 10% of Indonesia's seas or 100% sustainably managed fisheries, and expanding planet positive economies and sustainable development practices. So our works in North Sumatra, the things that I will talk more in this session, will include related to sustainable palm oil, which is linked to our first and third focus as an institution. So where we work in, so if you see the map, so this is where we work. The landscape or seascape where we are work are highlighted in blue, and the offices are highlighted in the yellow dot. So yeah, I'll talk more on North Sumatra, which is the one in the left here in Sumatra Island. Yep, thanks, Maria. So can we go next? So this is a landscape overview. I said that we want to talk specifically about the district where we focus our effort. So South Tapanuli district is one of the districts in North Sumatra. This district has 60% forest area, about 250,000 hectares. So 60%, over 60% of the area is a forest. So peatland ecosystem, it has peatland ecosystem, more than 16,000 hectares. That's the government data, but if you look at the field data, where we found that it's even more, it's more than 30,000 hectares. It's the home to key biodiversity area like Batang Toru Forest. If you are from North Sumatra, I think you are familiar with Batang Toru Forest and Batang Angkola Forest. This ecosystem is several endangered species, for example, Sumatran tiger and Tapanuli orangutan, sea turtles, and so on. So this area is also a place where key commodity produce, for example, coffee, palm oil, rubber, cocoa, palm sugar. And expansion, agricultural expansion to forest area, it's even though now it's reducing, but it's still happening. It's likely because of the limited productivity, a lack of livelihood options, and lack of forest enforcement. We also noticed that a limited support from the government due to poor access, because usually villages located near to the forest area, the access to that area is very difficult. So limited support from the government due to poor access is also one of the things that we are seeing in this landscape. Next, Maria. So this is how we frame sustainable landscape. What is sustainable landscape? We frame it as protecting natural capital by promoting sustainable production practices, good governance practices, and facilitating sustainable finance to ensure long-term benefits to people. What is the benefit to people? It's not only about income, but also climate stability, water, and food. And I'll talk more like each one, natural capital. So what we are, next slide, Mbak Lia. So what we are trying to help the government is here. We supported the government agency who has the authority to manage the natural resources. We are NGO, we don't have the authority. The government has the authority. So we supported them. It's including national park. If you're aware, if you are familiar with Batangadis National Park, and Natural Resource Conservation Agency, we call it in Indonesia BKSDA, and Forest Management Units. So those three agencies are the one who has the right to manage the forest area. We work with them. We focus our support in science or providing data, which will help them to make decisions for improved management of the forest area. Science and data here, it's including tools, providing them with tools, data analysis, data collection, for example, biodiversity monitoring to update the biodiversity data, patrolling tools to help them to identify what are the threats and define solution, and improve management plans. So the recent one, we supported the forest management unit in Padang Sidimpuan. They manage 127,000 hectares with to revise their management plan. So this is one of the work, like we see the picture that communities and our team is installing the camera trap. So, and so there's a tiger captured. It's the first tiger captured in the camera in Batang Angkola. So, and this data help the forest authority to design or improve their management plan. Next one, so yeah, and this part is about the community. The community can also help or support the management of the forest area. So we have an approach called conservation agreements, and the government has a program called social forestry. So we try to combine these two. So using conservation agreement to help community to manage social forestry area. Like conservation agreement, it's a negotiated agreement, an agreement in which community commit to conservation actions in exchange for benefit. But social forestry is basically community-based forest management. So the government gives the authority, the right to the community to manage certain forest area. So combining conservation agreement, which has a clear targets for conservation and improved management through training, provide benefits, it's could contribute to the success of social forestry. So the community can also support the government to protect the forest area. So that's basically how we frame this slide. Next one, but yeah. So yeah, I think the other thing that I'm talking is about the good governance. So spatial planning, it's also part of the good governance that we are working. So we try to support the government to delineate important ecosystem in the spatial plan. We supported the strategic environmental assessment, like identify which are the priority area for protection, which area has a need, like a carrying capacity. So provide this information to the government, so the government will delineate this area as a protected area or important ecosystem. So that's basically. And the other thing is the kawasan budidaya khusus. What is the kawasan budidaya khusus? Is a spatial plan regulation, like innovation from the South Tapanuli to accommodate the high conservation value and high carbon stock assessment. So we conducted this HCV and HCS assessment and found that in South Tapanuli, there are some high conservation value that still outside of the forest area. So the government, the Bupati, initiated to expand the area, even though it's not kawasan hutan or forest area, but they want to protect it. So they initiate their own regulation, district government policy. They call it kawasan budidaya khusus, basically about spatial cultivation area to cover the high conservation value. So they identify 178.5 thousand hectares. And the recent one that we are working, we're supporting with the government, the detailed spatial plan. So because sometimes the plan at the higher level, a district level, and province level, it's not that detailed. So we even work with the government at a detailed spatial plan. It's basically it's providing technical support to the government in a very detailed, specific site. What should be done in, for example, like a village level or sub-village level, to make sure that it is well planned to ensure that the protection of important area are covered. Next, Mbak. So sustainable production, if you remember about the framework, sustainable production is one of the component. So we are working with multi-commodity, palm oil, coffee, rubber, cocoa, and we also help building the capacity of the institutional capacity of the smallholder. So we help establish the association. So there are some association here. And in coffee, we help establish the MPAG Mandeling. It's also a smallholder coffee farmer association. And we, with the government, we provided technical capacity like GAP, good agriculture practices, and conservation practices. We established demonstration plot. The idea of the demonstration plot is to practice. And we seen a lot of good result. Currently, we had a data that showing more than 50% of the increased production in this demonstration plot. The other one is access to market. So right now we are helping certification process. I think the first Janice Lee mentioned about RSPO. We are now supporting 800 farmers to get RSPO certification to help them with better price, like premium price. And the lastly is we are working on like strategic plan on sustainable action plan. In here, I have put example of sustainable coffee action plan, but in the previously together with Ibu Diana, we also helped the district government on sustainable palm oil action plan. Yeah, next one. Yeah, this is about sustainable finance. So CSL, we call it Coalition for Sustainable Livelihood. We realize as an NGO, we are here to help the government. And we realized that NGO cannot work alone. Like we need to work with other NGO, and we need to work with other private sector, academics, institution, and other government, not only like state crop or perkebunan or agriculture, but we need to work across the sectors. So this is a coalition that we think that if you want to get an impact, we need to work together. So CSL is initiated by us, like Conservation International, with other partners, learning from our experiences that we cannot work together. We cannot work out by ourselves. We need to work together to make the impact. So CSL is a place-based platform. We try to drive collective actions and investment to advance the goals, like the shared goals. Government, private sector, civil society, we need to work together to make an impact. Otherwise, it will be too late, because I think the video shows the challenge. The video shows about the issues is emerging. So if we are just working by ourselves, it won't solve the problem. We need collective actions. So that's basically about CSL. The last one. So this is what our takeaways from the landscape approach. The first one is science is needed to support decision making and to design the project and design the implementation. And second one is we need long-term investment. 1 year, 2 year project, it's not enough. We need long-term investment, because restoration is not enough for 1 year, 2 years. Restoration need at least 5 years to make sure that the seedling that you plant it's growing well. So 1, 2 years or even 5 years is not enough. Long-term investment for impact and sustainability is really needed. So multi-level partnership is key for success. We can't work alone. Like NGO, there's a lot of NGO in North Sumatra, or maybe across Indonesia, or maybe globally. We need to work together. Each NGO, they have their competencies or specializes, so they need to work along to make an impact, for better result. So pilot, like I mentioned about a few pilot is good, but innovation and strategic planning is needed for scalable impact. We cannot just do one pilot here, one pilot there, but we need to have an impact, like scalable project, scalable impact. And the last one is sustainability plan upfront, like a lot of NGOs, or maybe not only NGO, but other organizations, just do the work, just working on the project. They are too late to think about the next step of the project. What will be this, how to sustain the project, how to sustain the impact. So what we recommend is working on the sustainability upfront. When you design the project, design the sustainability plan as well. Don't think about the sustainability plan later. Otherwise, it's too late. And when you finish the project, all of the investment will gone. So that's I think that's all what I want to share to all of you. I hope it will helpful and provide some insights. So yeah, thank you, Bu Diana.
Thank you very much, Ibu Fitri. Thank you, Janice. I think we already start to capture that the whole discussion from the first day now and even tomorrow, all about taking concern about what will we expect in our future life. That's why you are all youth here, because you are part of that, and we are using the positive ways to positive approach to analyzing the issues, not only raising issues and make it more complicated, but how to solve it, that kind of issues. We already have 3 questions here from Muhammad Azhar, Johnny, and Dion, and we're still waiting for others. Do you want to us by yourself, or I can read it for you. Azhar, are you there? Oh, from Arini. Arini first. Are you there, Arini? Do you want to ask it by yourself, or you want me to read it for you? Okay, maybe I just read. Okay, yeah, please do.
Thank you so much. Okay, dear Professor Janice Lee, good afternoon. I'm from Indonesia. I'm Tiaring Utami from Malikusa Universities. From communities driven deforestation like a beef and then soil.
Okay, so the question is to Miss Jenny. The question is, which commodity is the largest causing of deforestation and why? Maybe the concern is palm oil that bad, or it's not only about palm oil? Please, Ibu Jenny.
Thanks very much, Arini, for your question. I think, at least based on the graph that I showed in my slide, there was one figure that talked about the deforestation that came from the different commodities from 2000 to 2015. And in that slide, it showed the extent of forest being the highest in terms of deforestation. So cattle, which is pasture as a land use, so that's beef, contributed 45.1 million hectares from 2001 to 2015. And then that was followed by oil palm, which is 10.5 million hectares, and then soy, which is 8.2 million hectares. So, there are many different ways to quantify this, because here we're only talking about forest loss, right? But if you were to change the environmental metric to carbon emissions or biodiversity loss, the most important or the most contributing commodity could change, right? So far, the data that I have is only for forest loss. And it comes from Global Forest Watch, which is from the World Resource Institute. So if I were to answer your question, cattle, which is beef, would be the commodity that causes the largest cause of deforestation based on this data that I have. And simply because I think cattle just requires a lot of land. So you need a lot of land for grazing. And after that land has been grazed, it will deplete in its nutrients, right? It will also deplete in the grass cover. So then they have to move to a different location to graze. So that's why, the expansion is, or rather it takes up more land compared to, say, oil palm, which grows for 30 years at most. And then after that, you cut it down and then you replant it. But within that 1 hectare of land, for the period of 30 years, is able to produce fruit, at least from year 5 to year 30. So there's this continuous, depending on how you farm your oil palm, every 3 times a month you will harvest it, or every twice a month you will harvest it. So as a perennial crop, there's some advantages of it because, it's really there compared to pasture, which, after the cattle has grazed in one area, you would have to move to a different place. So, there's this issue of now abandoned pasture land, which is like actually being converted into oil palm. So in some parts of Central and South America, people are starting to think about what to do with the abandoned pasture. Because, it used to have forests, it was cleared for pasture, and then, can we rehabilitate the land? So actually some people are thinking of like planting oil palm over abandoned pasture to try to increase carbon sequestration. But you cannot apply these kinds of concepts. You cannot generalize these concepts, and say that, we can do the same thing in Indonesia. I guess you have to look at each site and be very aware about the contextual aspects of each site. right? So each side is very unique. Indonesia is also very unique in that sense, and yeah, I mean, like it's got its own history of land use change. So I hope that quite answers your question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So we move to the second question, since the question is very much related to both speakers, Ibu Janice and Ibu Fitri. So I think we just move to the second question. Second question is about if I was an owner, our participant is already had a dream to be the future leader that wanted to expand the garden plot, and what solution could I have made to stop deforestation, and what would I get if I turn on deforestation anyway? Maybe like sanction or punishment. I think this is more empirical question. So I would like Ibu Fitri, can you address this question, please?
Okay, sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Budiana, and thank you, Sharul, for the questions. I think the first thing, if you want to expand your palm oil, I know in Lot Sumawe, there's a lot of palm oil plantation. If you want to expand your palm oil, first one, check the status of the land. If it is forest area or it's APL. So Indonesia divided into forest area and APL. Forest area, it can be different forest zone, protection, production, conservation. You need to check first, what is the status? If it's forest area, it is illegal to expand palm oil in the forest area. If it's non-forest area, you can expand your palm oil plantation. But if it is not forest zone, it's no forest zone, but you still see that there are some trees covers that area, you need to and there's a wildlife, maybe like elephant or so on, you need to carefully expand your plantation. First, it's you need to first like we need to see like which part of the landscape are the elephant corridor. That's the first thing, because otherwise it would be like a conflict, like human-animal conflict. Which one is the corridor to identify which part is the hot spot, right? And if try to avoid the hot spot, that's the second one. It's try to avoid from the corridor. And if you avoid that, second one, it's the best option is to do the agroforestry. So as Dennis mentioned, agroforestry is the best option. But if that palm oil is the solution, and you need to think about the landscape. If it's riparian area, you need to taking care of the riparian area, like sempadan sungai. That's how we call it, like riparian area. Riparian area should be protected. That's the law. What the law said. It's also protected not because of the law. It's also to protect the riparian for the sustainability of your plantation. And the second one is you need to think about the slope of your area. If it's too steep, better to plant some trees to protect the slope. That's, yeah, I think that's would be our like a suggestion. And if you can be part of the smallholder association and working on certification, that would be perfect.
Thank you, Ibu Fitri. Next question, please. Next question, I think this is related to both. There are a lot of wild animals in the forest, and we know that in Indonesia, there are a lot of forest fires, such as in Riau. Both speakers are very much, have many experience in this area. Kalimantan and others. Forest fires will cause damage to the environment and loss of wildlife habitat, so that many wild animals enter residential areas. So want to ask is whether there are any efforts by the government, either on the national or even international scale, regarding the handling of the loss of wildlife habitat? Because I'm in Sumatra, many animal loss habitat and disrupting oil palm plantation, so that palm oil production decreases every year. Okay, so maybe we would like to ask Ibu Janice first, what Ibu Janice think about this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Azhar, for your question. I think at the government level, I mean, the oil palm or the palm oil moratorium is one of the ways in which at least a halt in the expansion of oil palm is encouraged from the government. At the international level, there are funding channels which are dedicated to trying to reduce deforestation and degradation. However, it's always been extremely challenging to stop deforestation, because I think the scale of the governance doesn't quite match the problem. You have people at the local level that rightly need, the opportunity to improve their livelihoods, and also to be able to farm. But at the same time, you have the issue of the issue of deforestation that's happening, and the encroachment, especially into national parks. I mean, Indonesia already has a system of protecting forests within national parks, but the enforcement and implementation isn't exactly there. And, you can look at Tesonilo in Riau, and you see half of it is really planted with smallholder oil palm. So what do you do? I mean, do you evict people out of the land? And that will cause conflict with the communities that are already there. And, it would be a very difficult situation to, try to also manage this conflict. So I think there's really a need to have a deeper understanding of who exactly are the people that are causing deforestation. Is it really the small farmer that is poor? Is it an actor that is actually a middle-level entrepreneur that's actually living in the city, for example, in Pekanbaru, but it's actually paying like people to encroach on the land and setting fire in the peatlands? And the real responsible people might not actually be the people who are living where the deforestation is happening. And I think these set of actors, even though they are a smaller number, they have a larger footprint because they tend to aggregate land 100, 400, 500 hectares. And they would also have the connections to expand the land in protected areas or into kawasan hutan, which is supposed to be, for, production, forests, or, not exactly, the land that's dedicated for agriculture. So there's still a lot of very thorny political issues, I would say, really on the ground to stop these actors from conducting deforestation. And you need to segregate, who's responsible. Is it really like poor farmers who are landless and really need that opportunity to increase their livelihoods? And you saw how can you negotiate a pathway out of this? And I think, what Ibu Fitri had presented about the Sustainable Landscape Partnership is one example where there's this multi-level partnership that really try to work towards that. But then you have a whole set of actors, which might be small, but have a very large footprint and might have very powerful connections that prevent that kind of implementation of law and legal system to push them away and to stop their actions on deforestation and fires. And I also agree that the wildlife that is affected by habitat loss is now causing conflict in plantations. Recently, I had a student who put together newspaper reports to look at conflict between people and tigers in Riau. And we see that most of the sites of conflict is actually happening in the plantations rather than in the forest. So you see a lot of these wildlife like elephant orangutan, tigers that need the habitat, in order to survive, right? But because of this loss of forest, you see an increase in this interaction and engagement with people, and so that can lead to conflict. And how can people who are living in these areas adapt to this situation? Are they tolerant or are they not tolerant? How can we increase tolerance? How can we increase coexistence? So just to give an example, I have a PhD student who works in India. India is a very interesting country in a sense that it's highly agricultural, but high density of mammals. So you have big mammals like the cow, the elephant, and they are coexisting in some ways in the landscape. So not just, for sure there's conflict happening, but there's quite a high tolerance for leopards, for elephants that pass through their landscape. And I think there's something also to understand about, human psychology and also like adaptation to this issue. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Janice. Pak Rudi is already here again, but maybe we finish with this question first, because I know that Ibu Fitri has long experience in working with government, including the wildlife and empowering local youth in Tapanuli Selatan. Maybe you will give some insights before I pass it to Pak Rudi, Ibu Fitri.
Yeah, thank you, Bu Diana. Thank you for the questions. It's really good. I think Indonesia, the government has done many things, even though it's not enough. We need to do more. But the things that the government doing is, first, government ratified some a key convention, like regulatory framework. For example, the UNFCCC, the climate change. And the UNCBD for the biodiversity. So the government ratified and make quite like ambitious a goal. For example, the goals of emission reduction is 26% with Indonesian effort and 41% with the support of the others. It's a good commitment. And the things that the government have done, first one is the forest moratorium. And it's palm oil moratorium, even though it's expired now. We don't have any news about the palm oil moratorium, but that's a good intention, right? That's a good effort. And now the government has the Polunet 2030. That's also a very good commitment, how the government tried to protect the existing forests. And the government also has a restoration target. And the thing that I mentioned previously about social forestry is also a way, like a strategy, a plan by the government to find solution for the smallholder, like giving the smallholder a certain piece of land, a forest area, give it to the community, not to plant palm oil, but do agroforestry, do tourism, if it's still some a forest area and has an opportunity or potential for tourism, the community can do that. So it's so there's a lot of things that the government tried to provide here. Even we know it's not enough, but some effort has been done. So now I'm in Papua, in West Papua, in Manokwari. It's really interesting if we compare in North Sumatra, or maybe in Kalimantan, or in Riau, and in Manokwari, in here in West Papua. I don't know if you heard about the local community, the masyarakat adat, the indigenous people of West Papua. They revoke the concession, because they don't want to lose the forest, their relationship to the forest, their relation to the wildlife, the burung cendrawasih and other kind of birds, it's really strong. And they don't want to lose that culture. So they managed to revoke the concession that given to companies located in critical or has the cultural relationship with the community. So they managed to revoke that. So yeah, the government has some part, the community itself, they also have some voice if they really want to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Fitri. With this, I pass to Pak Rudi. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Bu Diana, for being around to share the session. I think I lost some of the question from my chat box. Committee, can you display that? Yeah, okay. Yeah, from Miss Azhar Kashi. There are a lot of wild animals in the forest, okay? Or from Mr. Johnny Hendy Karyanja from Tas Negeri Medan, there's a question. As we know that palm oil effect on resin deforestation, and the biodiversity loss, especially in Indonesia, yet at the same time, it helps human life from economic sector. What policy, regulation, and how do we make sure that the slogan of deforestation free can be implemented wholly in all palm oil industry, including those who are independent farmers who have their own plantation? What policy and regulation, and how we make sure the slogan of deforestation free? I think the question goes to Janice, Professor Janice.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Joni, for this very good question. Yeah, I think that the issue of equity is very important when we are thinking about deforestation, free related policies. Many times the deforestation free policies are being encouraged or being promoted by the big companies like Wilmar, and they have the capacity to be able to monitor deforestation in their concessions. They have the capacity to influence actors in their supply chain to be able to reduce deforestation. But when we talk about smallholders, especially independent smallholders who do not have a relationship with a company, right? They are very much on their own. And so they will find many challenges in trying to implement these kinds of policies. Firstly, being aware of them, also how it affects their production and also their sales, because they are not plugged into the global market, right? And they rely on third-party agents or middlemen to be able to facilitate the purchase and also the processing of their fresh fruit bunches. So when we talk a lot about deforestation-free policies that are being set up, for example, currently there's a law in EU that they are talking about to only allow commodities that are deforestation-free to enter the EU market. So what does that mean for the smallholder? And I think it has got good intentions to try to reduce deforestation in the producing countries, but it may have a imbalanced effect on the producers, with perhaps more of the market share being captured by the big producers and then less by the smallholders. So how can the smallholders be included? How can the smallholders be incorporated into these kinds of deforestation-free sourcing policies and also supply chain? I think smallholders, and I think maybe this is something that Ibu Fitri can talk more about because she has got the underground experience. But I do think that the setting up of cooperatives and also tapping into the power of collective action and also negotiation is one way for smallholders to be engaged in these kinds of supply chains. There has to be a commitment to stop deforestation and to also reduce whatever degradation activities that are happening within their own plantations. And these kinds of awareness could probably only come if they partner with somebody else like an NGO or another company. And I do know that there are companies out there, for example, Musimas, which has got a program that specifically trains, I think, independent smallholders. So they have the training of the trainers. And maybe this is something that will be talked about by, I think, Mr. Robert Nichols tomorrow in the Musima session, where they try to incorporate independent smallholders into these kinds of supply chains. But really try to get the commitment from the smallholders, providing them support and training to be able to include them into these deforestation-free policies. So it has to come with some support for these smallholders. If not, I think that they probably won't be able, they'll probably be excluded from the markets that are demanding higher standards of sustainability policies. So that's from my end. Maybe Ibu Fitri can speak from her experience. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. Thanks, Janice. Yeah, I think it's from like my a point of view, like reviewing the government policy. We Indonesian government has a lot of policy, and they are really good. They are really good policies. For example, I talk about the spatial plan policy, spatial plan at the provincial level, at national level, provincial level, district level, sub-district level. It's really good. And we have the forestry policy, which is really good. The thing is the implementation, the enforcement, that's the lacking. It's enforcement, helping the community. It's good to have a policy, but help the community how to deal with that, how to work with the policy. So enforcement is good. Enforcement is now still lacking. That's the problem why the deforestation is still happening. And I think like we agree that we need to find a solution, not like like independent smallholder. They need support, right? They need help. They need to find the solution. It's one of the things, it's building the awareness. What is the impact if we clear out the forest and start planting palm oil or maybe other crops in the landscape? What would be the problem in the future or maybe in the short term? So that's kind of awareness that it's really needed. And sometimes we thought that they understand, but actually they really they don't know much. And the second one is support them with the solution. The solution can be providing information or a capacity how to improve the productivity from the existing one. Maybe they don't need to expand. I just want to share a little bit of example from the district that we work on. So if when we collect the baseline data, what are the productivity of palm oil there? It's only like 8 tons a year per hectares. Or some farmers get a better harvest. They have 11 ton per hectare per year. But if you see the companies next door, they have like a 22. They can double. So there's a lot of things that we can do to improve the productivity. No need to do expansion, no need to do clearing, but they need to, they have other options like improve the productivity. The main problem that we saw, it's about seedling. Our independent smallholder, they planted like a poor quality of seedlings. They don't use fertilizer. That's the main challenge. So if you do those two things, two key things, it improves. It helps a lot. The other thing is it's find other solution like livelihood options. What are the livelihood? Not necessarily clearing forests. Now we are thinking about the era of social media. The millennials, they like to have to travel, ecotourism. It's something emerging right now, like tourism businesses. And many of the forests is good for bird watching, forest walking, and hiking, and so on. There's a lot of livelihood option that can be developed, not only depends on palm oil. So yeah, I think that's I hope it can help. Pak Rudi?
Okay, thank you, Bu Fitri and Janice. Next question, please. All right, okay. From Dion Saputra from Jambi, there is a problem when it comes to deforestation in our oil palm plantation, especially in Jambi. Okay, Dion is from Jambi. The problem is the perception of community and farmers that do forestation for land clearing. Okay, I know we need to reduce it, but it is needed. How do you think about this, and how we can change the perception of the community and the farmers? Okay, I think this question first goes to Ibu Fitri. Jambi, I believe you have experience in that place too.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Rudi. Thanks, Dion, for the question. I think it's this case it's a trend, an issue across Indonesia. Yeah, I think it's yeah, we know we need to share the perspective to the community, like what is the importance of the forest? What are the services that I think Janice explained about the services that the forest provided, the provision services and cultural services and other services, that kind of information that need to be shared to the communities to widen the perspective. It's not only about income right now, but they need to have an income, a long term. They need an income for their grandchildren. It's not their own income, but income, like sustaining income for the future, sustaining livelihood for the future. That kind of a perspective. Sometimes we just want to have a quick wins, but quick wins is not the solution. It's not a long-term solution. It's just a quick win for maybe temporarily 1 year or 2 years. But that, I think that's the thing that when I look at the farmer, smallholder, the thing that they're really lacking is about planning, like financial planning. It's also the thing it's really lacking. It can reflect how they are thinking about the future. Sometimes they are not thinking forward. They're just thinking what happened now. They need food, they need money, they need income, so they need to clear the forest. But us, maybe like students, like academicians and NGO in the government, our role is to provide, to share the perspective with them that they need to think about the future. We should balance development and environment, like economic development and protecting the nature that provide us with the long-term development or sustainable development. I think that kind of role I mentioned about awareness is one thing, like perspective is one thing, but we need to help the farmers with improving the productivity from the existing land to help them to avoid clearing or deforestation, and help them with the other livelihood options that should not necessarily will clear forests. So that's maybe, it's not an easy job. I think there's a lot of NGO. If it's already easy job, maybe we solve this problem. It's not an easy solution, but we need to think about it, and small step, it's necessary. So like students, if you have an idea, you have so creative, innovative, if you have an idea, that would be good to share, but yeah, it's not easy, but we need to keep working on it.
Thank you, Mufitri. Janice, want to add something about this issue? How can we make deforestation free in the society?
I think Putri had already mentioned very good angles to try to convince farmers and communities about changing perception. My only additional point would be to think about the health of people. So a healthy environment is also needed to support a healthy life. And in Jambi, which is where we wanted to work on peatlands, but we didn't in the end because of COVID. You know, there is so much problems with the haze and the fires. And I mean, you know, it comes back to hurt people. And we already have heard about anecdotal accounts of how infants and elderly people die because of the haze. Women who are pregnant have miscarriages because of the haze. There's lower water availability. The temperatures of the land is rising because of the clearing of forests. So there are very real immediate impacts on communities. You know, disregarding, you know, concern about the environment or concern about animals, just concern about your own health, and also concern about your children and your grandchildren's health and their future. You would want to support a healthy environment. So I think starting there to try to promote sustainable land uses would be another way to try to encourage farmers to stop deforesting, and to start thinking about how can they produce more with their existing land. You know, what are the ways in which they can work together as a collective, you know, to try to help each other to encourage sustainable land uses. So maybe from that motivation of human health or the angle, that's also a very important motivation to try to convince people. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor Janice. Let's go on to the next questions. How many questions we have?
Done, Chris?
Coming to yes.
Yeah, that is the last one.
That's the last
we did.
question. Okay.
Yes.
Participants, delegates, do you have any more questions to ask to Ibu Fitri Hasibuan or to Professor Janice Lee? If you don't have any, I think we can jump now to the post task. Then we'll show you a video of last year's activities, so you know how to submit and how to make your assignment, group assignment. Okay, admin, can you help me to show the post-test questions using the Mentimeter? Again, please grab your device, go to menti.com, use the code 81332729. Go to menti.com, get the code 81332729. To make it easy for you, check in the checkbox. We have copied the link for you to click. Okay, first questions. Do you think oil palm plantation is part of the deforestation issue? Yeah. Similar questions to the pre-test, but after the presentation, we want you. Okay, no. Still, yes. Yes, it is one of. Okay. So in the first pre-test, we know that most say yes, only one say no, but yes, it is. Okay, it's one of the issues. Yes. Okay. Mostly in Southeast Asia. Okay, I think yes. So oil palm plantation is a part of deforestation issue. Yes. To some extent, we do all agree that it is one of the issue. Okay. 13 responses so far. It is one of the issue, mostly in Southeast Asia. Okay, 14 responses so far. All right. Okay, wait for more responses. Okay, yes, it is right. Oil palm is the reason. So after the presentation, you just think that oil palm plantation is also a part of the deforestation issue. Yes. Is it? Okay, admin, please help me to mute. Okay, oil palm is the reason. Yes, it is one. Okay, 16 responses so far. Do you think oil palm plantation is part of the deforestation issue? I think we still have quite similar answer like the pre-test. Now let's move to the next questions.
Only one question, sir.
Only one question. Okay. Well, so we don't ask them the next question. All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, participants to the workshop, this is your TSSPO for the second day. We want you to watch the video. The video will be played for you. Please pay your attention because we are going to have or to make a similar video for you group assignment. Admin, can you show the video, please?
Koordinasi untuk program yang udah disetujui dengan, nah sebenarnya sih harusnya
di WA group yang IMTGT juga, Bu.
It's also under the responsibility of the plantation manager. Existing network are very good because the execution of the project.
Okay, so this is our agenda for today. First,
hello everyone, we are here from Group 1 from the Sustainable Workshop.
I'm from Indonesia, especially University of Medan State.
Hi everyone, I'm Shu.
She's Indonesian and she's from Jambi.
And I've stayed in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
She's originally from southern part of Thailand.
She's from southern Malaysia.
Hello everyone, I'm Nasarisha, the aid coordinator of the Group 8 in this workshop.
Daddy, this is from Indonesia.
I'm from Malaya University in Thailand.
But at the same time, we can fly further and broaden our network, and we can meet here relatively easily. We also realized that we have some common interests and concern.
Welcome to Universitas Sumatera Utara. Welcome to the workshop entitled Palm Oil Sustainable Supply Chains and Sustainable Landscape.
Led by Dr. Diana Charlier, Chairman for the IMTGT Seminar Subcommittee. Congratulations for successfully hosting the workshop.
We need you. We need young people. We need innovative people. We need new brains, new ideas. Because the world is changing.
Our ground rules for a few days until 30 September. Agriculture service, people, planet, profit. Okay.
Apa itu traceability dan bagaimana penerapannya?
So this map illustrates our footprint. As you see, the mills that we procure from are situated.
Dengan aplikasi ini saya harapkan cukup kita inputkan data satu kali, orang nanti anggota masing-masing bisa langsung akses.
Our palm base around you, not our all external product based, but our palm base around you. So I will give.
Okay, 9 participants.
In palm oil supply chain is affect many things, especially the environment.
Particularly Indonesia and Malaysia, which together are responsible for most of the world palm oil supply.
Because that plantation is already exists. So how can we help them in order?
Then causes more poverty, natural disaster.
Each year, 15 billion trees are lost to deforestation and forest degradation.
What about important deforestation? How useful is the concept? So let's take the worst hypothesis. Let's imagine that 100% of all palm would cause deforestation.
How can we actually preserve that high or maybe medium level of crop production and yet at the same time sustain all other kinds of ecosystem services?
It is on the starting slope, but very slow, I have the feeling.
All of the things from the very beginning until the product are arrived for the consumer is called as supply chain.
Forestation is defined as the permanent conversion of forest area into settlement for human activity.
Certification seperti apa yang lebih bisa diterima oleh bagaimana menjadikan ISPO lebih baik sehingga dapat diterima.
Absolutely agreed by CIRAD. We're talking about the challenges and the perspectives of certifying this kind of production like the palm oil.
It has been explained comprehensively by Dr. Lang. And another point perhaps is that as pillars, the three pillars.
They own the mills, so you can imagine how efficient is the system because there's no negotiation of buying price, of transportation price, and so on. The whole system belongs to.
What is the benefit of being sustainably certified?
First, it shows that the company complied with the standard, so consumer can see that rules and regulations have been put to work.
That cooperate with the both public and private partnership.
And in other way around, it won't hurt the local economy, but it would actually help in raising the economy for the entire world.
And finally, the palm oil industry should be implementing a diversity policy.
Palm oil is an edible vegetable oil that comes from the fruit of palm tree.
WI analysis showed that deforestation in the period 2013 until 2017.
By educating them about the effect of their actions, such as palm oil consumption.
So there are 3 categories to meet the certification criteria. The first one is
combining all of 3 components of social progress, economic progress, and environment, we can move towards a sustainable future.
It is also the ability of the present generation to meet our own needs.
Ability affects just about everything.
It affects your life on Earth. You'll inhale less pollution.
Hi, don't waste your time. You have to think alone. Your head will be more.
Palm oil is actually the most efficient oil to produce. It comes out from the fruit of the palm oil tree. It can produce more.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So I just asked Maria. I think I have done my responsibility.
I am yet to respond on this best awareness reason because
yes, please.
Yes.
Because finishing the research in September on October.
Okay. What matters the most is the effort and commitment that you had shown, and not to forget the friendship which established among you, isn't it? Okay. The winner for the press presentation on supply chain goes to group 2. The second runner-up goes to group 3. The first place goes to group 2 and the second place goes to group 3. Okay, congratulations. For best presentation award on deforestation goes to group 5. On deforestation goes to group 4. Classification, first place goes to group 9 and the first runner-up or the second place goes to group 8. Group 1, group 6, group 10.
Thank you very much, and take care of yourself, your family, and your loved ones. Hope to see you face to face very soon. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Okay, very nice flashback. It was just like yesterday, remembering all the videos. I do believe that the participants for this year workshop will have a clue of what they have to do in the discussion. All right, we come to the end of this session for today, to the second day of the workshop. Then we want you to have a group discussion. I would like to deliver the sessions to the group coordinators and give the session back to Ibu Diana to arrange the meeting, the discussions session. Ibu Diana, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Pak Rudi. I think I would like to, Ibu Fitri is still here. Bu Janice just say goodbye and thank you. Especially with very good responses from all of us. Hopefully the message is already received by all of us. And just for the closing of today's session, I would like to remind again what Pak Rudi already remind us about the task that we are expecting from you. The first one is about the perception. I think still a number of students haven't submit the 3 minutes videos about their perception. We really want to know, what do you think about the sustainability? Is it important to you? And what can you observe from your surrounding? And then the second one, you already been divided into groups. Hopefully you will use the Zoom that has been distributed one to each of the group and use it to know one to another. So please give also 3-minute video introducing your friends, your new friends, not you not introducing yourself, but your new friends. So not only us know about your new friends, but you know more about your new friends, although you haven't got a chance to meet it in person. And then this the last one is also 3 minutes video about the summary of the yesterday topic about the global market, and then of course today's topic. And each of the videos is already been provided with Google Drive that you can be submitted different different link for different videos. I think that's all from us for today. Any other? Then Okay, so I think that is for today. Thank you from all of us, from all the team, Haslin, Ria, me, Chris, of course, Pak Rudy. Thank you, Pak Bu Fitri, and thank you for all the students. See you tomorrow. Don't be late because we are going to have interesting topics. Pak Rudman is here today, and Pak Rudman is going to present with Pak Rob tomorrow and with Pak Iskandar from the government, from the Kementerian Perdagangan, Trade Ministry. So hopefully we are going to have a complete picture about sustainable palm oil management. Thank you. Assalamualaikum. Kapung Kap. Have a nice day.
Thank you. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Mbak Fitri.
Bye.
Is that the end?